Well, it is great to have you with us for this Easter celebration. And the celebration of Easter is about the resurrection of Jesus. But often we forget about the tension that occurred between that resurrection day and the crucifixion day. And during that time, can you imagine the emotions, the difficulty, the struggle of those disciples? Because they don't know the resurrection's coming, even though Jesus predicted it. They thought everything had fallen apart. And imagine with me what they might say, what they might feel, as every plan they had, every promise that was given to them has come crushing down around them. And they're saying, God, can you explain this? Can you help me out? Things weren't supposed to go this way. Things weren't supposed to happen this way. You've been crucified. Many of us don't have to imagine it. Because we're in a moment, we've had the last couple of years where we've had something that didn't go according to plan, didn't go according to expectations. And we, like the disciples, one denied Him, one betrayed Him, the rest of them are scattered, and they're saying, God, I'm giving up that you're good, I'm starting to give up that you have a plan. God, I'm starting to give up on you. Could you explain what's going on and help me in the middle of this challenging circumstance? This next song gives voice to what those disciples might have been feeling between Friday and Sunday. So here are the disciples. They spent 3 years with Jesus, and now they're facing fear, they're facing trouble, they're facing doubt. And like I said, one denied Him, one betrayed Him, and the rest scatter except for John. And they are saying, the Romans are still in charge. I had plans to be in the administration. I had plans of being part of Jesus' plan to overthrow the world. Is anything He said true? He got crucified. God, can you say something to explain this? I'm about to give up based on the circumstances on faith. Help me in the midst of this. Help explain this to me. And again, these are the disciples. And if they struggle with doubt, and if they're struggling with the story of what God's doing, how much more might we struggle with God's story in our life? I don't know about you, but I face the face of doubt when I face something I've never faced before. Isn't that when doubt comes into your life? I start facing the face of doubt when I face something I've never faced before. For me, it's when I face the unknown or the unexpected. I thought we were going to go this way, and now life's going that way. And now I thought I had a strong faith, but now I'm facing the face of doubt because I've never faced this before. Something I care about, my marriage. I'm wondering if it can and will it make it. My kids have always been good kids, but now they're starting to make iffy decisions. Or I wonder why a best friend, or why I didn't make that team. Or maybe it's just the unexpected tragedy. It's a doctor's report. It's an audit. It's a lawsuit. And all of a sudden, everything's swirling inside you saying, God, I've never faced this before. I don't think anyone personifies that struggle that the disciples have more than Thomas. We even call him Doubting Thomas. And yet Jesus has 3 encounters with Thomas in His life that teaches him very practically what His death and resurrection is all about. It teaches him how to face fear, how to face trouble, and how to face doubt in your life. And I think that's something we all need. 2 of those encounters happened before His crucifixion, and 1 happens after His resurrection. The first encounter is this. Jesus is going to show Thomas how he can deal with fear. You see, they're on their way to visit a sick friend named Lazarus. And Lazarus is sick, and he's a good friend of Jesus. And they said, Jesus, come help Lazarus. He's sick. The disciples say, I know you want to go see him, but don't go there. Don't head that way. There's people going to try and kill you. People are trying to stone you if you go there, Jesus. It's time to be fearful. People are out to get you. To which Jesus says, aren't there 12 hours in a day? See, you don't stumble during the day as long as you know the light of the world. As long as you see the light of the world. I'm not scared. See, God has a time for me to die, and it's not today. And I've got a window of opportunity, 12 hours of my life, 3 years of my life, and I'm going to comfort people, I'm going to serve people, and I'm not going to live in fear. The fear of what other people say. I'm not going to live in the fear of what other people do. Because I know I have a death coming. And I'm so confident that I can face my fears because I know the face of the one that controls the future. And Jesus boldly, bravely goes in against their advice, attacks his fears, and helps his friend. Reminds me a little bit of a story. If you saw the movie We Are Soldiers, it tells a story about a colonel, Colonel Hal Moore, a man who was also a believer in Jesus Christ, who also believed Jesus came and defeated death. So as a commander, he could lead his men into battle and say, I have confidence that I know the face of the one that controls the future, and he's chosen when I'm going to die, and I'm going to go about boldly in my life, facing fear. 2, even if I do die here, I have trusted the one that defeated death. So even if I die in battle today, to be absent with the body is to be present with a God. So he turned to his men as they're heading into Vietnam and about to go into battle. He said, men, I cannot promise you that I will bring us all back alive today. But before you and before Almighty God, I make this promise. These boots will be the first on the battlefield. And these boots will be the last to leave it. And we will all be coming home together, so help me God. And men followed him into battle, this courageous leader, because they saw somebody who had such confidence in a God who could defeat death or raise him if he died, that they followed him on the battlefield. Thomas must have felt the same way, because Jesus says, by the way, just to let you know, my friend Lazarus has died, but I'm glad this circumstance has happened because I'm going to raise him from the dead to give actual facts and proof to my resurrection power. There's going to be witnesses to see that what I'm going to do to myself, I will do here to someone I love to show you my power. And I do this because it will increase your belief in God and increase your belief in me. And Thomas says, doubting Thomas, years before he's doubting, says, let's go with him. I'll die with him. I want to be next to the guy who's the light of the world. I want to be with somebody who can defeat death. I want to stay close to somebody. You don't stumble when you're near him. See, the way you face your fear is you know the face of the one who controls the future. Well, a few years later, Jesus has another encounter with Thomas. He's walking with the disciples one day. As they're walking together, he realizes that the disciples are troubled. They're nervous. They're nervous about life. They're nervous about all the accusations. They're nervous about all the ways in which the world has really come against them. And so Jesus turns to them and says, do not be troubled. And I want to help you know how. You believe in God, and that's helpful, but it's not enough. You need to believe also in me. For in my Father's house, your real home, are many mansions. And if it were not so, I would not have told you. But I'm going to go, and I'm going to prepare a place for you, that when I return, I will bring you to where I am. And you know where I am, and you know the way. And Thomas says, we don't know the way. We don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Jesus says, you don't need all the details, but you know the way. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And Jesus is saying, if you want to face trouble in your life, here's some things you need to know. Number one, you have not faced anything that I didn't go ahead of you to prepare. If you're struggling with rejection, I'm going to be rejected. If you're struggling with the fear of death, I'm going to take on the fear of death. You ever been betrayed? I'm going to be betrayed. You ever been stabbed in the back by a friend? I'm going to be stabbed back by a friend. Whenever you feel alone in your troubles, know that I have been there before you, and I will walk through this with you. Number two, what I want you to know is that this world is not your own. Your real home is my Father's house, and I'm preparing a place for you. And if you realize that this world is not your true and final home, it lowers your expectations because you realize final meaning and final purpose doesn't come from here, it comes from there. It's like this story in 1910. Teddy Roosevelt was on his way home from one of those big safaris he had. He was coming home on a ship liner, and as he was coming home, there was a missionary couple that was with him. And they had been serving for decades. I mean, just decades. Caring for the poor, serving, telling people about the love of God. And as they got on the ship that day, they were heading home from Africa, and they were making their way. And they made it up to New York, and they could see the fanfare. They could see the bands. Welcome home, Mr. President. People cheering Teddy Roosevelt's home from one of his many safaris. Well, as they got off the boat and saw all the fanfare and all the cheering for Teddy, they realized nobody was there to greet them, to ask about their faithfulness, to ask about their stories, to ask what they've overcome. And they were just sad that many years of work and no one was there to greet them, to welcome them home. They snuck off to an apartment building that night, and the husband was still so resentful, angry, frustrated. His wife said, "Why don't you go and just pray and ask God what He would say about this?" So he went in and he just prayed, "God, why all this work, all this faithfulness, all this dedication, all these years, and no one was there to welcome us home?" He felt like God said as clear as day these words, "Yeah, but you're not home yet. You're not home yet. Africa wasn't your home, but New York's not your home. When you get home, there will be a fanfare. There will be cheers. There will be celebration to all these years of faithfulness. But don't mistake your final home for your home in New York." It's like every year we send teams down to Cancun. We send a high school team, a college team, a women's team, and a men's team this year. And while we're there, we get to work with and help some of the poorest of the poor. And if you're walking through the villages of Cancun, one of the things you notice is just these very, very impoverished folks. Beautiful people, thankful people, happy people, living in buildings and homes made out of corrugated metal, rusty metal. It's raining on you as you're sleeping at night. And as you're all day serving, we were building a soccer field the year I came, or building and working with the teams there. And every night you come and you stay in back-to-back facility, which is a very modest home by American standards, but a mansion in Cancun. And you're sleeping in these bunk beds. And while you're in the bunk beds, what you notice is it's incredibly uncomfortable compared to, say, your select comfort bed at home. But no one complains. Now, why don't they complain? Because having seen all the poverty in the world, there's things going on in the back of your head that educate you to understand the predicament you're in, that help you with your troubles. The first thing you tell yourself, even if you don't know it intuitively, is, I'm not here during this mission trip to be comfortable. I'm here to serve. So my expectations are not that life is a mission of how to be comfortable. It's a mission on how I can serve others. The second thing while you're laying there in bed trying to get comfortable is you say to yourself, this is temporary. This is just the season. I'm only going to be here for a short period of time. And third, you say, this is not my home. And Jesus says that's the same thing you do when you have difficulty in this life. You remind yourself, comfort's great, convenience is great, but He didn't put us here on this earth to be comfortable. Our mission is to serve others. Secondly, when you go through a season that's difficult, between your life and your death even, you say, this world is just temporary compared to my final home. My final home is where I find meaning and purpose in life. And that's what He was teaching Thomas. The reason I left heaven and came to earth and died was to pay for what's broken in this world. And I raised myself from the grave so that you would know that there is a final home that I can take you to. And you can face your troubles by facing the reality that this world is not your final home. But he has a third encounter with Thomas. And the third encounter is what we know in Easter as that moment in the garden tomb. As he comes out of the garden, guards surrounding to make sure no one could steal the body. The stone is rolled away. Jesus steps forth and He gives facts on how to deal with doubt. Now it's amazing because none of the disciples seemed to even imagine He was going to die, despite how clearly He said it. And none of them fathomed that He could raise Himself from the dead. So when He appears in a real body. He says, look, I'm not Casper the Friendly Ghost. Look, real body. I can hug you. I can eat fish. I can eat honeycomb. And if you trust in me that I've raised myself from the dead, I can raise you from the dead when you die as well. I've defeated death. He appears to Mary, to Peter, to John. At one point, He appeared to over 500 people at once to have evidence. But the one person He wasn't there that day was Thomas. And Thomas is like, when all his friends and disciples came back, Jesus is alive! Jesus is alive! No, not a chance. I'm not going to get fooled again. I don't believe it. Until I can touch the nail holes. Until I can put my hand in the side that the Romans cut him open, I'm not going to believe it. Doubts. Based on scars of the past. And how does Jesus interact with somebody with doubt? He says, you face doubts by facing the facts. 8 days later, he appears to Thomas. He says, Thomas, I want to help you. I want to help you with your doubt. Faith is not the absence of evidence. Faith is getting more evidence. I want to give you evidence that I really did raise myself from the dead. Do you need to touch the holes? Do you need to touch my side? Thomas, stop being unbelieving. Be believing. Face your doubt by facing the facts. I am alive. And he falls to his knees and says, my Lord and my God, which means my owner and my master. And Jesus turns to everyone else in the room and says, now blessed are those who see and believe. But even more, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. See, Christianity doesn't claim to be a religion. It doesn't claim to be a philosophy. It claims to be an act of history. And if it is history, it's either true or it's not. There's either evidence that it happened or it didn't. And the Bible says there's historic evidence that Jesus Christ died and rose himself from the grave. And by looking at those facts, you can have hope and confidence that what you believe is true. That he is with you in the midst of difficulty, that he can overcome the challenges in life. Maybe you know the story of Simon Greenleaf. He was one of the founders of Harvard. He sort of known if you're a lawyer or a judge, you would know him because he developed the rules of evidence that we use in the court of law today, training judges and lawyers for years. And he was a skeptic toward the Bible. Oh, it's just Aesop's fables. It's just a nice story. It's just urban legend. And several of his colleagues and students came to him and said, what if you applied your laws, your rules of evidence to the Bible and asked if the historic records validate that Jesus Christ died and rose from the grave? What about the eyewitnesses? What about the archaeology? What about external evidence? He laughed. All right, fine, I'll do it. He began to explore. He began to look. He began to weigh the evidence as the expert who made the very rules that we use for the laws of evidence. And he was shell-shocked to come to the conclusion that based on the facts of history, Jesus Christ literally died, literally was buried, and literally rose from the grave and transformed the world and uprooted the Roman Empire through this message of love and forgiveness. And he wrote it in this book called The Testimony of the Evangelist. It's true. It's real. So the way you face doubt in your life, what Jesus says to Thomas is, you need to develop a habit. You've got a habit right now of approaching something and you immediately doubt God's goodness. You immediately doubt whether or not God's there. You immediately doubt if he really cares. You need to stop being unbelieving in your habits. Instead, face the facts and start believing, start trusting, start developing that faith. So you can face whatever you're facing, he says, if you face it with the face of God. So when you say to yourself, life should be easy, you look at the cross and say, the one guy who is perfect didn't have it very easy. Why do I think I'm the exception to the rule? God, I'm going to trust you that you're going to give me the power to overcome a difficult world. And I'm not going to be surprised when difficulty comes my way because Jesus had a difficult world. When I feel like my world's out of control, I'm with the disciples saying, oh my goodness, at the moment Jesus was crucified, everything felt out of control. But God was more in control that day than ever. This was part of his plan to bring good out of an evil moment. You say, God, I want to trust you based on the facts of history and what you did on the cross. If you struggle with perfectionism or criticism or beating yourself up, you look to the cross and say, wasn't he beaten enough? What will you add to what God has done by beating yourself up? Look to Jesus and say, look, I took the punishment for you. You don't have to live under guilt. You don't have to live under shame any longer. I took the full beating. Stop beating yourself up. Look at me. Let me take your beating and let me make you perfect. If you wonder if God loves you because of different challenges and circumstances in your life, you look to the cross and say, look, the one thing whatever's going on in your life can't mean he doesn't love you. He put his arms wide open to embrace you and say, I died for you. I love you so much. And then he came out of that grave. When he came out of the grave, he said he went back to our real hometown, our real home in heaven, and he's going to come again one day to return and get us, to bring us to that world with no pain, with no suffering, with perfect justice. But until we get there, he gives us his Holy Spirit to live in us, to be that engine, to empower us for the joy we need, the peace we need, the self-control we need, the forgiveness we need. And what the resurrection was about is that he came to say fear can be defeated, trouble can be overcome, and death can be defanged. And Easter says, I am alive, Jesus says. But more than that, I've come to make you alive as well. If you want to know how to face fear, if you want to know how to overcome trouble in your life, if you want to know how to overcome doubt, Jesus says, come and ask me. Don't try harder. Get closer to the light. I have everything you ever wanted and everything you ever needed. Well, happy Easter. It was great having you with us this evening. If you came prepared to give us some offering boxes on your way out, we appreciate you being here. Hope you have a great Easter, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks again.